Qui-Gon used it, Obi-Wan used it, Ahsoka uses it, but across 25,000 years of galactic history, only one species has ever truly mastered Form 4. And the reason isn't training, it's biology. On Geonosis in 22 BBY, Count Dooku had already put down 2 Jedi in a single hangar. He blasted Anakin Skywalker aside with Force lightning, wounded Obi-Wan Kenobi in the shoulder and thigh, and severed Anakin's arm at the elbow. Then, he turned to face the figure stepping into the hangar. The figure stood roughly 2 feet 2, weighed 13 kilograms, and was 874 years old. And what he was about to do, no other body in the galaxy had ever done. A Jedi leaps, feet above the ground, saber angled down, the descent is timed so the blade lands before the body does, while the opponent is still bringing his guard up. That single image, repeated across 1,000 frames of Star Wars footage, is the signature of one combat style. That style was Form 4, which the Jedi called Ataru, the aggression form. Ataru was the 4th of 7 classical lightsaber forms taught at the Jedi Temple, named and cataloged in Star Wars Insider's Fight Saber article, and later expanded in Daniel Wallace's The Jedi Path, a manual for students of the Force. It sat just past Suresu, the shield form, in the teaching order. The Jedi Path described Ataru as, in many ways, the inverse of Suresu, where Suresu answered Force with defense, Ataru answered Force with motion. Ataru's answer was to stop defending and start moving. The form was built on Force-assisted acrobatics, aerial attacks, and overwhelming offensive momentum. Practitioners use leaps, spinning strikes, and rapid changes in elevation to overwhelm an opponent from angles a standing duelist could not cover. The goal was not to trade blows along a single line, the goal was to flood the enemy's guard with motion, then land the strike from somewhere the guard was not. Ataru did not outmuscle, it outspaced. By contrast, every other classical form kept the fight on the ground. Makashi stayed close and elegant, Suresu stayed tight and defensive, Gemso rooted itself in strength, and Niman balanced the saber with force techniques. Juyo and its darker derivative, Vapad, drew from raw internal intensity. Every one of them fought the duel at roughly the same horizon. Only Ataru fought it in 3 dimensions at once. And that was not a style choice, it was a response to a specific combat problem. The form lets smaller, physically outmatched practitioners compensate for their own disadvantages. Smaller, faster practitioners could use height and angle to turn the fight into something a bigger body could not follow. A leap became a strike, a flip became a repositioning, and motion itself became the weapon. That advantage, however, came with a price. Ataru demanded open space for its sweeping arcs, constant engagement with the Force to power the leaps and flips the form required, and the cardiovascular endurance, joint resilience, and recovery time that sustained attack demanded. Many Jedi across the Order's history learned the basic footwork, the entry leaps, and the standard aerial strikes. They could perform Ataru in a training hall and cite the principles from memory, but learning Ataru was not the same as mastering it. Mastery meant sustaining the form through a full career in real combat without the body collapsing under what the style demanded. 10 years before that hangar figure stood on Geonosis, another Ataru practitioner had walked into a very different duel on a different planet, and had not walked out of it. Qui-Gon Jinn's master had been Count Dooku at the Jedi Temple. The pairing was unusual from the start, because Dooku's personal specialty was Form 2 Makashi, the duelist style, and Qui-Gon's was Form 4 Ataru, the aggression style. A Makashi master training an Ataru student spent years watching the apprentice fight from the inside. Every weakness of the form, every opening it left on the descent, every moment a practitioner's body could not quite do what the form demanded, Dooku saw all of it, across every sparring session, for as long as Qui-Gon was his apprentice. What he was gathering in those years would not pay off for decades. On Naboo in 32 BBY, Qui-Gon was a seasoned Jedi in the late stages of his career. The sources disagree on exactly how late. Canon places him in his late 40s, Legends in his early 60s, but both agree on what that meant against an opponent in his early 20s. The duel in the Theed generator ran in rising gear. Qui-Gon pressing forward with Ataru's signature tempo, Maul matching every beat with a spinning double-bladed guard. When the laser gate slammed shut and separated Qui-Gon from his Padawan Obi-Wan Kenobi, the fight narrowed into the melting pit chamber. The interval between Qui-Gon's strikes grew longer, his recovery between exchanges grew slower, and an older body was operating a form designed for younger ones. The form did not fail him. His body could no longer do what it demanded. Then, Naboo happened, and Obi-Wan walked away from the form that had taken his master's life. Obi-Wan Kenobi had learned Ataru directly from Qui-Gon and used it throughout his early career. But after Naboo, he committed himself to Form 3 Soresu, the defensive form built to outlast an opponent rather than overwhelm one. Star Wars Insider framed the shift as a deliberate response to what had taken his master's life. Matthew Stover's novelization of the third prequel film confirmed the result of that commitment. By the end of the Clone Wars, Mace Windu recognized Kenobi not merely as a Soresu master, but as the master of the form. That recognition was why the Jedi Council sent him after General Grievous on Utapau in 19 BBY. Ahsoka Tano kept a piece of Ataru alive, but in a different body and a different stage of life. Tano fought in a reverse script Jarkai style, described in Clone Wars era reference works as an Ataru-Xian hybrid, and she was young enough to have the joints, the reflexes, and the recovery time the aerial work demanded. She was not alone on the Clone Wars roster. Aayla Secura carried Form 4 into the war in the Legends record, trained by her own master, Quinlan Vos. Kit Fisto, often shown flipping and spinning alongside them, was a recognized master of Form 1 Shi Cho, the simplest form taken to its highest expression. Daniel Wallace's The Jedi Path, a manual for students of the Force, described Ataru's demands in direct terms. Practitioners drew constantly on the Force to power leaps, flips, and aerial strikes, and they could not sustain that output forever. The manual framed the form as something the body had to support, not just the mind. Every exchange cost energy the practitioner had to recover before the next one, and against a younger, fresher opponent in a confined space, those recovery windows close. For a human Jedi, Elite Ataru performance had a natural window measured in decades, not centuries. No reference source has pinned a specific number on it, but the record told the same story. Inside that window, the form was relentless. Outside it, the body started refusing what the form demanded. Obi-Wan Kenobi's shift to Soresu after Naboo was the clearest case. The young Jedi had watched his own teacher's career end in the one environment Ataru was never built for, and Kenobi moved to a form that did not demand the same body. On screen, his later style retained some aerial work, but the spine of his combat changed. Kenobi became a Soresu Jedi who could still jump, rather than an Ataru Jedi paying the price every time he did. The brutal arithmetic of the style was that it demanded the most from the body during the years the body could give it, and then asked for more during the years the body was already giving back. A human Jedi facing that math made a choice. Some, like Qui-Gon, held a line and trusted the Force to carry them past the limits. Others, like Kenobi, read the same math and switched forms. A few, like Ahsoka Tano, were still on the near side of the window and had not yet made the choice. One species in the galaxy operated on a different clock entirely. That species had not escaped the biological math. It had simply been handed a different equation. Longer careers, smaller frames, and a relationship with the Force that started at birth rather than through training. Every pressure that broke Ataru practitioners after decades of practice was a pressure this one species was built to absorb. For humans, Form 4 has an expiration date. For Yoda's species, it doesn't. Star Wars timelines places Yoda's birth in 896 BBY, which made the hanger figure from Geonosis 874 years old, with 3 more years of active combat ahead of him before Order 66 ended the Jedi Order. That kind of combat window was not a human number, it was not a Wookiee number either, or a Twi'lek number, or any number any other species in the Jedi Order's recorded history could show. Ataru had taken Qui-Gon's career at 50. Yoda's species held the same form for 800 years. The question was what made the difference. Lifespan was the first observation, and the most obvious. Star Wars Alien Archive, supported by Star Wars timelines, describes a natural lifespan measured in centuries rather than decades, with Yoda living to roughly 900 years and Yaddle still on the Jedi High Council in her late 400s. A species member who reached mastery at 200 had hundreds of years left to refine the same techniques against new opponents. But lifespan alone did not explain it. A long-lived body that still took the same physical impacts, landing after landing across 1,000 fights, should have aged out of Ataru the same way a human body did, just later. The form's wear accumulated per movement, not per year. Something else had to be reducing the cost of each movement itself. That something was body mass. Star Wars Absolutely Everything You Need to Know placed Yoda at roughly 13 kilograms, or about 29 pounds. An average human Jedi weighed 5 to 7 times that much. Every Ataru demand that came from physical impact, the landings, the spinal compression from overhead flips, the recovery load between exchanges, scale directly with body weight. A 13-kilogram body absorbed a fraction of what a 70-kilogram body did. Where a human master accumulated joint wear across 4 decades of combat, a species member accumulated it far more slowly, because the physics of each movement were gentler on smaller tissue. This answered part of the question, but not all of it. Physical impact was one cost. Ataru demanded constant force engagement to power the leaps and control the descents. A human Jedi could train that skill, but the force engagement sat on top of a body that had lived its early life without it. The body learned to draw on the force. It was not built around the force. For Yoda's species, that was not true. Star Wars Alien Archive catalogs every known member of the species as force sensitive, and Yoda, Yaddle, and Grogu all showed that sensitivity from earliest life. The implication Ataru demanded was not a technique layered onto their combat. It was already part of how they moved, from the first time they moved at all. That still left the hardest part of the mystery. Small bodies with force sensitivity should have let a species member master Ataru young and retire from it old, the way humans did, just at a different scale. Yaddle fought at 477, Yoda at nearly 900. These were not compressed careers with earlier peaks, they were full mastery held across centuries. The body was not just absorbing the cost, it was somehow refusing to decline. Star Wars Alien Archive, supported on screen by the Mandalorian's dialogue about Grogu at age 50, describes the species as remaining in infancy for at least 50 standard years and reaching full development by around the 100th. Past development, the curve flattened. Yoda looked recognizably himself across 3 centuries of recorded order history. Yaddle held her physical form for roughly 4 centuries of active service. The species lived on a long plateau of preserved combat capability, followed by a late decline, rather than the steady downslope a human body took from its 30s onward. That plateau did more for Ataru mastery than any single biological trait, because Ataru demanded consistent physical output over decades of refinement. A human Jedi got one good window, a species member got dozens. Yoda, Yaddle, and Grogu all presented with 3-fingered hands, ending in small claws. That hand structure appeared consistently across the species in every reference. A 3-fingered hand with clawed tips gripped a lightsaber hilt differently from a 5-fingered humanoid hand. The claws anchored the fingers against the hilt during sustained overhead swings, and the grip produced a different rotational leverage on the blade. None of that was a deliberate design choice by the species or by the form's creators. It was simply what the species happened to have, and it served the precise kind of combat Form 4 required. The hand was not the headline trait. It was the one that almost went unnoticed. No other species in the recorded Jedi Order combined all 5 traits. Humans had skill, but not time. Wookiees had longevity, but not the frame. Nautilans had the force connection, but not the scale. Twi'leks had the flexibility, but not the plateau. The combination sat in exactly one place, and that combination was not something the Jedi Order trained into Yoda's species. It was something they walked in the door with. Every biological trait the species has, Ataru rewards, which leaves the Jedi archives holding a question they never answered. The form's recorded origin is thin. Legend sources trace Ataru's earliest documented use to the Mandalorian Wars era, roughly 4,000 years before the Empire. Before that, the archives go quiet. The Order's story is simple enough. The form was developed, it spread, and Yoda's species, like other Jedi species, happened to master it. Except the timing creates a problem. The senior Jedi at the Dantooine Enclave during those same Mandalorian Wars, holding the leading seat on the Council at the precise era Ataru enters the record, was Vandar Tokare, a member of Yoda's species. That's circumstantial evidence, not proof. But it's not nothing either. A form rewarding exactly one biology across a galaxy of thousands does not look like a coincidence of training. It looks like either a form built by the species for itself in an earlier era the Order never cataloged, or a species that walked into a new form and found the grip already fitted to their hand. The archives do not say which. The archives do not say because the species was there when the archives started. In 32 BBY on Coruscant, Yaddle, an Ataru-trained member of the Jedi High Council who would step down that same year, confronted a fallen Count Dooku and did not walk out of the meeting. Her death sits at the end of a line that ran across 4,000 years. A decade after Yaddle fell, the Grand Master of the Order stepped into a hangar on Geonosis and opened his own duel with Dooku. The first exchange was not Form 4 at all. Dooku hurled debris and force lightning, and Yoda deflected and absorbed both. Only after the fallen Count declared the contest could not be settled by their knowledge of the Force did Yoda ignite his lightsaber and launch into the spinning, acrobatic, elevation-changing work that Ataru was built for. Dooku's Makashi countered most of it, and the duel ended in stalemate when the fallen Jedi toppled a massive hangar column towards the wounded Obi-Wan and Anakin, forcing Yoda to break engagement to hold the mass with the Force. 3 years later, in 19 BBY, Ataru met a different kind of opponent. After Order 66 eliminated most of the Jedi Order, Yoda returned to Coruscant and entered the Senate chamber to face Darth Sidious. In the duel in the Galactic Senate, the Dark Lord hurled waves of Senate pods at Yoda using the Force, and the Jedi Master leapt between them, dodging from one to the next with his own Force powers. Later in the fight, Yoda was knocked to the Senate floor. As clone troopers closed on his position, the Grand Master retreated through the ventilation shafts and escaped with Bail Organa. The circumstances had closed around the form, not the other way around. Earlier in the Order's record, the same combat signature appeared in the Deep Legends era. Vandar Tokare led the Dantooine Jedi Council during the Mandalorian Wars around 3964 BBY, and the Knights of the Old Republic campaign guide gives him the Ataru lightsaber form and dual lightsaber proficiency. Dual shotos, short lightsabers, held and moved in a combat style almost no humanoid body could sustain. Vandar did not stop at holding them. Through a force technique called Improved Kinetic Combat, he could wield his shotos without holding them, striking with them telekinetically through the Force. A pint-sized Jedi described as olive skin in reference books, but rendered with an orange tan tone in the 2003 video game, sat at the top of a council that would argue bitterly with Revan and the Exile when they chose to fight the Mandalorians against the Council's will. Vandar was among the more sympathetic voices in that debate, and the form that carried him was Ataru. 15 centuries later, another member of the species turned up in a role no other Jedi of his kind ever held. A species whose entire documented record is small frame acrobatic combat, produced around 3600 BBY, a fleet commander. Oteg served as a Jedi Master and Fleet Admiral of the 1st Expeditionary Fleet, and Star Wars The Old Republic shows him leading the Maelstrom prison operation to rescue Revan from Sith imprisonment. His personal saber form was never specified, but his presence in an Admiral's chair pushed the species thread across another full era, and into a kind of command that would not appear in the species' record again. Roughly 7 centuries before the Battle of Yavin, a different kind of Yoda species duel played out on a swampy world on the galactic fringe. A Bipfashi Force user had fallen to the dark side and was cutting a trail across the Sluice sector that the Jedi Order could no longer stand. Minch, a Jedi Knight from Yoda's species, was sent after him. The Bipfashi fled to Dagobah, a planet of black water and twisted trees. and took refuge inside a cave that would become a nexus of the dark side through what happened next. The legend's short Heart of Darkness depicts the duel. Minch entered the cave alone, carrying a green-bladed lightsaber, and fought in an aggressive two-handed style. The Makashi had the terrain on his side, the geometry of the passages and the darkness already pulling in them. Minch had centuries of trained combat and the species' natural force sensitivity. The duel ended with the fallen Makashi dead inside the cave. The act of dying there at the hands of a light side Jedi anchored the shadow to the ground. That place stayed dark. 7 centuries later, when another member of Yoda's species needed a hiding place the Empire would never find, Yoda went to Dagobah. The dark side energy that Minch had left behind was dense enough to mask Yoda's own light side presence from the Emperor. The dark side cave was not a discovery he made on the planet. It was the reason he chose it. The thing that made Dagobah usable as a hiding place was the same thing that made it dangerous to live near. And the order that put Minch on that path was the order Yoda was now the last survivor of. At the start of the Geonosis duel with Yoda, Count Dooku raised a saber in salute. Curved hilt, one-handed grip, ceremonial pose. Every Ataru duelist in the galaxy would have recognized that signature. The salute belonged to Form 2, Makashi, the contention form. Daniel Wallace's The Jedi Path, a manual for students of the Force, described Form 2 Makashi as a style built for precision, economy of motion, and single opponent dueling. Where Ataru flooded the guard with motion, Makashi refined the blade down to a single point of pressure and waited for the opening. Where Ataru moved the body, Makashi moved the wrist. Makashi didn't chase the acrobat, it drew the leap, and it intercepted the body coming down. Matthew Stover's novelization of the third prequel film detailed the specific mechanic. Against an Ataru duelist, a Makashi practitioner did not engage the leap, he provoked it. Per the novel, Dooku drove thrusts at his opponent's legs to draw the Ataru user into a flipping overhead leap so that he could burn through the body from kidneys to shoulder blades on the descent. The mechanic was the entire counter: force the leap, then strike the back on the return. The novelization describes Dooku attempting exactly that tactic against Obi-Wan aboard the Invisible Hand, and finding it stonewall because Kenobi had become a master of Suresu and his Ataru and Shicho openings had been ploys. Count Dooku didn't learn that counter from a library. He learned it from his own apprentice. Stover's novelization puts it directly. Dooku had fenced Qui-Gon thousands of times, and he knew every weakness of the Ataru form, with its ridiculous acrobatics. He had collected that knowledge across a full apprenticeship. When the Count left the Order and turned to the shadow of the Force, that knowledge became a weapon waiting for a target. The first target was another member of Yoda's species. Inside the Lemerge power building on Coruscant, on a day in 32 BBY shortly after Qui-Gon's funeral, Yaddle was 477 years old and had just realized that her old council colleague Count Dooku had fallen to the shadow of the Force. She confronted him alone. Between them was roughly 400 years of Jedi service on her side, and on his, decades of watching Ataru from the inside of Qui-Gon's apprenticeship and knowing exactly where the form broke. Yaddle opened the way she had been trained to open. Force levitation, fluid body motion, acrobatic counters across the floor of the chamber, the same Form 4 framework Yoda would bring into Dooku's hangar a decade later. Star Wars Alien Archive puts it directly. Like Yoda, she learned the lightsaber form Ataru. Dooku did not engage her leaps. He set up for them. Strikes came in low, forcing her to rise over them, and he waited for the descent that Ataru's own geometry required. Decades of watching Qui-Gon had taught him exactly this sequence. He knew what the form demanded a practitioner do with her feet, her spine, her guard. He knew where Ataru left a body exposed between one leap and the next. The end came through the architecture of the building itself. Dooku slammed down a heavy hangar bay gate on top of her, using the bay's controls and the Force together. She caught it. For a moment, the full mass of the gate hung suspended on her Force lift. She lifted the gate back up with the Force, a final display meant to reach Dooku one more time and hold him to the light. The effort broke her. Yaddle collapsed to the floor of the chamber, exhausted, the gate falling behind her. Dooku walked towards her. Yaddle on the ground was no longer an Ataru practitioner in motion. She was a small body in a robe, 477 years old, looking up at a Jedi she had known for decades. Under Sidious's order to kill her, Dooku delivered the strike. A single lightsaber slash, framed in the episode as the gift of peace, ended her. The Makashi counter's former apprentice had unknowingly taught him was not the blade that killed her, it was the blade that brought her to the floor. By the time Yaddle hit the ground, the knowledge Dooku had built from sparring Qui-Gon had already done its work. Only one combat form in the galaxy had ever taken a species member's life with a blade, and it had taken hers. The species owns Ataru. Ataru owns every other species' joints. Makashi owns the species. Even so, the species Ataru line had not ended. Somewhere on the galactic rim, under a Mandalorian's protection, a species member not yet out of infancy continued to grow. Grogu had not committed to any saber form by 9ABY, and he had not picked a lightsaber of his own. The Mandalorian establishes Grogu at age 50, still an infant. Star Wars Alien Archives and Star Wars timelines place full maturity for the species around 100 standard years. Most adult members of the species live for centuries, and Yoda himself reached 900. The next Yoda species, Ataru Master, had not yet reached the start of his prime. He was still in the long infancy the species required before the body could hold what the form demanded. Somewhere, a 50-year-old child is still learning to walk. When he picks up a lightsaber, the species hold on Form 4 will not break. It'll begin its next chapter. One duel on Dagobah would eventually create the Darkside Cave, which Yoda later used as his hiding place. One video covers that duel and what it did to Dagobah. The other covers every known member of the species across the galactic record and everything the Jedi Order kept quiet about them. Watch them next.